weed it out, unfortunately, via suicide, or I would find a way to make myself fit into this jigsaw puzzle of society, and my way to do that was I just gotta fucking be happy. It was not, it was just, there was no, there
I
was just
love
like,
that.
I have to be happy. I can't do anything else. And so it's either I pick one or the other, and I made a decision to just try to survive and try to fit in.
All right, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Andre Victor Dudescu podcast. Today, my guest is someone I know as Nam, but
Yeah.
I'd like to let him introduce himself because he has I'll call it a non-Western name.
Yes, it's Nnamdi Azikiwe. Yes, it's a Nigerian name. Met at a poetry reading. It was my pleasure to listen to some of your work. I did some of my work as well. But yes, yeah, it's been good. We haven't talked all that much, but definitely got to know each other a little bit, I guess, through our works. And so yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, I think our meeting was definitely quite an accident because we both showed up at the poetry reading when we shouldn't have, like 2 weeks early or something.
Yeah.
Although they did switch it up on us in the last minute. So yeah, I mean, like one thing that really drew me to your poetry was like how direct it was in evoking feelings that maybe I would be less willing to share with other people, right? And I mean, like I think you like took it down from your account,
I
right?
did.
Because I remember seeing a bunch of them,
Yes.
and I guess that was maybe like in my mind, it was like you probably thought, maybe I shouldn't let people see that far into me.
So yeah, I definitely like to touch on very raw feelings that I've been dealing with for a very long time in my poetry. I I always write out of pure emotion. It's never, I don't say, oh, I'm going to sit down and write for 2 hours or try to create some sort of art or work. It's always, I feel something and I kind of need a way to release it. And I write exactly how I feel and I try to make it as poetic as possible. And I don't have a very big Instagram account. I've never been one to really want that. And when it was really small, I felt a little bit more comfortable putting my thoughts and feelings and emotions on my page. But as I started to follow more people and let that account grow a bit, I thought maybe I should take it back into myself. I do think that those kind of feelings are necessary to talk about, though. I do think it's very important to let them be known. I think it makes everyone feel a little bit more comfortable and a little more safe when you have open discussions about those kind of thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if you follow the UFC, but there's this one fighter, Paddy the Baddy, who like after his win, he went and he like told everyone that it was specifically men. Like if you have thoughts of suicide or whatever, like go talk to somebody. Don't just like hold it in and do it. Because one of his friends had just like killed himself before his fight, and he wanted to prevent that.
Mhm.
I thought that's an unusual venue to talk about like mental health and like pain and stuff like that. I mean, obviously he didn't do it poetically like you did. For you, it's like I feel like you're kind of on the border of like, this is worrisome and this is like just an expression, like an artistic expression, right? Like
I mean, I don't know. This is Patty Labadie.
Patty the Batty. I don't know his last name, but he's
Oh,
known
okay.
as Patty the Batty.
Okay. Well, I do know of DeMar DeRozan, who is an NBA player. I don't watch the UFC that much, only here and there, maybe with some friends. But DeMar DeRozan he used to play for the Toronto Raptors. We're in Toronto. And he spoke openly about his dealings with depression. I don't know if he specifically spoke about thoughts of suicide, because obviously there's differences, but he spoke about that. And I think that because men don't speak about those emotions as much, it's very good when anybody does it, but it's definitely very good when men who are famous and have larger platforms make it known that it is okay to talk about it. So to go after a win in a fight and speak to a lot of men, especially in a sport that definitely has many more male viewers than female viewers, like the UFC. I think it's very important, and I admire the fact that he did that.
I mean, like one thing that comes to mind um, with that is like you said that um, it's important because the NBA has all these male viewers, and presumably mm, it's the kind of thing where like sport in general is about winning, about being a winner, about overcoming weakness, right? So it's almost like the perfect place for people to um, kind of like fall into this trap of thinking that like, well, I'm a loser, I don't really deserve to live, or something like that. Although I don't know, like from what I remember in your poetry, I don't know if it was if it was so much this sense of like being cast out, but I guess you could say that, or like I remember like romantic rejection being a big part of it, right? And like, I mean, sorry if you don't want to talk about this.
No,
Like,
no, no, no. We can talk about that for sure.
no, I'm just thinking like, I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson, but he talks about how like being rejected by a woman isn't just like, oh, like she doesn't want you, it's no big deal. It's like you're being rejected as like a like your very existence, right? Because like if you aren't being like selected by women, then like you're, you can't reproduce, you can't go on to the next generation. It's like your whole, you're kind of like trapped in time, whereas other people who are more successful can like extend their progeny, right? They can be fruitful and multiply.
I think that naturally as a person, I'm somebody who craves love. I think I've always been somebody who craves that in multiple forms. I feel like and I think that's one of the main things that was a catalyst for my depression and my suicidal thoughts that I've dealt with, was always craving more love and not feeling like I had the influx of care and affection that I do have in my life. And I think that that was something that I struggled with for a very long time. And I think that plays into what you're talking about. Whereas men, I think well, I think a lot of people aren't equipped with it, but men aren't equipped with the ability to deal with rejection, or I think men struggle to kind of identify love and how to deal with love and receiving it and not receiving it. And I think I was definitely a proponent to that. Uh I definitely did that a lot in my own personal life, and that came out in my poetry, was feeling like I wasn't good enough to be loved, feeling like I didn't have enough love even though I did, not being able to recognize love. And I think that that was kind of where my poetry started. Was It was always revolved around love, and it came out in very romantic ways, as you saw, because that's kind of what I was going through at that point. But yeah, I think in general that's where it stems from in my perspective.
You know that idea of like attachment theory.
I mean, I probably have heard it, but if you can run me through.
Yeah, so like the idea is that I mean it came from this guy John Bowlby who um I mean he was raised in kind of this old school British household, like I think middle upper class sort of, where kids are mostly taken care of by nannies, or when they're, I don't know, 7 or 8, they get sent to a boarding school, and it really toughens them up in a way, right? Because it completely separates them from family. It teaches them like discipline, and I mean, I guess it's part of like training people to run an empire or something. But like, um, he found that like it really messed him up psychologically, right? To not have any connection with your parents, right? And to
Yeah.
be raised to be kind of like a tool of the state. And
Mhm.
so like he went into psychology to research this, and he found that um, when it came to juvenile delinquents, like people with severe behavioral problems, like one thing they all had in common was like they had some kind of broken relationship with their mother. And he's like, there's no way this is a coincidence, right? And
Mhm.
so he started looking at, or there was some research about the way that I think ducklings attach to their mom. So like they need some kind of figure. They just like latch on to this figure as a form of security, right? Because like if you're um, um, like a baby of any kind, of any animal, like you're
Mhm.
basically helpless. And humans are more helpless than any other creatures when they're very young, right? So like, um, as an infant, you learn to, like scream, to cling, to do all sorts of things to get attention, right? To get food,
Mhm.
to get love, really. And depending on the kind of upbringing you have, there's like different kinds of attachment styles. So you'll have, some people who are like, they have secure attachment styles where like they feel very secure about the love that they have. Um, and ironically enough, like the people who have secure attachment styles, like when they're kids, if
Yeah.
the mother's around, they just feel more um, willing to explore, to play, to have fun. It's like this paradox of dependence, where you're dependent on a parent, but like once they're there, you have the like launching pad to be happy and secure in exploring the world, right?
Yeah.
There's other people who have like some variations, we could call it, of like some people who are extremely anxious, like they really cling on to their mother like crazy. Some people who are really avoidant, who just like try to um, like I guess like it sounds like just get rid of parents, like I'm going to be independent, forget them, who try to cut off that emotion from themselves. And of course, like these probably serve purposes when you're a kid. Like sometimes your parents might ignore you, so you have to deal with it, right? You'd be like, okay, well, I guess I'm alone, I have to figure things out for myself, right?
Hmm.
um, or um, they're like really inconsistent, and like sometimes you really have to cling on to them to give you attention anyway. So like um, i'm not sure, um, like there's some ability to change this later on, but like I'm not sure how much that ties into the feeling of a need for love, but I suppose it's possible.
I think like when it comes to like those attachment theories, I definitely think that as you grow, just like the nature versus nurture, I think nurture is a huge part of who we become. Even though I know that people, it's been proven like personality is very genetic and that it is passed down. But I do think the way that you handle yourself in situations, what you see, you take that in and it becomes a part of you. That's how you carry yourself. And it's not that I don't think that you are able to move past that. But I think that humans are very dichotomous beings. Like inside us, we always have things that are kind of conflicting. So I can be, I mean, personally, I think that I'm somebody who loves to give off love and I love to make people feel loved. But at the same time, I don't know how to handle it or take it in or experience it well. And I don't think that I had any sort of attachment style issues growing up. I don't, I do feel like I have a very wonderful mom and she took care of me very well. So I don't see that, but I don't know where there would have been maybe if it's possible from other people in your life, you can develop some sort of attachment issues or things like that. That could be
For
possible.
sure, yeah.
But I think yeah, genuinely I don't know where that comes from me personally, but I do think that naturally there's complexities in us. And sometimes you can have two things that seem like stark contrasts, like being someone who wants to care and being a natural nurturing person, which I do think I am and I try to be. But then also being terrible at accepting it.
um and do you think that being terrible at accepting it is a masculine or feminine trait, or is that just a general like variation among personalities?
Well, from this, no, I won't say from the start of time, but historically, women are taught to be nurturing beings. They're taught to, well, at first, oh, stay home and take care of your husband and tend to the kids and tend to the home and like hearty stews when husband comes home from work and that kind of ideology. And men are taught to be breadwinners. They're taught to wake up and go to work and make sure that people are provided for. And I think that though it is less common in society today, there is still sort of that idea is still sort of passed down. And I think that is I think that's sort of passed I think it's passed down from like my parents and my family. I think lineage, like just me being Nigerian, And those things are all in terms of being a provider and being strength. And when you think about strength, you don't typically think about accepting love or even giving love. You think when you think about strength, typically, I think people think about the ability to persevere, and I think that that might be where it comes masculine and a masculine and feminine thing. Whereas women, they're not necessarily, I don't feel like they're necessarily always taught to persevere unless it's persevering for your family, at least historically.
There's still a persistent idea that women are nurturing and that the man is the breadwinner and he has to be strong. And being strong doesn't really involve being in any way involved with emotions and love and good feelings. It's about duty and responsibility and performance.
Well, I want to say that this is what society began on, but I don't know if I think it still plays a part today, but I don't know if it's as prevalent, and which I think is a good thing. I think people are understanding that everybody's human, and that they have the emotions that they need to deal with. They have the ability to be depressed, whether you're a man or a woman, or to be suicidal, or to deal with any sort of mental health issues, uh, regardless of your sex or your gender. And I think so now it's becoming more understood. But I think that's just because of the way things started off, it might be difficult for men to always voice it or figure out how to deal with it.
Um, what kind of um, what kind of things were you taught by, let's say, your parents, or like what kind of attitudes would you say Nigerian culture has? I don't know if you're that familiar with it, having been born here, but
Um, well, there's a lot of things in Nigerian culture that like I disagree with, but specifically talking to this, I mean, I could tell a story, and I say this with like I know like the people in my life have the best intentions, but I also think that sometimes people are unaware of how things feel. And so I had a conversation with somebody in my family, and when we were having a conversation about suicide, and they said, "Oh, if somebody considers suicide, they're weak." And at this point, they didn't know, but I was having suicidal thoughts. And so in my head, I'm like, do these thoughts make me weak? And I think that's something that's common with people who deal with these thoughts, um, is that they really internalize what people say about them. And I think that that also plays a role into why they have these thoughts and these and why they deal with depression, and I think that plays a role in it. And so when I heard that, I was like, "Oh, so am I weak? Am I not just cut out for life because I have these thoughts? So that means that I don't know how to properly be a human being or deal with the things that comes with being a human." And having somebody in your family say that is it's difficult. It's difficult to figure out how to feel. It also feels like you cut off an avenue of who you can speak to about what you're feeling. So there's a lot of things that come with that, but I think that that is something that is learned and is consistent in Nigerian culture. I don't And just to like wrap up, I don't know if you've ever heard, but I've heard this from other ethnicities as well. A lot of I think from like South Asian, and they say that, oh, well, if you're feeling depressed or suicidal, you should pray, or that it's nonsense, or it doesn't make sense for you to feel that way, or you have everything you need, how could you be unhappy? So it's not just Nigerian culture, but that is something that is also in definitely ingrained in Nigerian culture. Is just mental health is not fully understood or even right, yeah, recognized.
very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would even say that like I'm Romanian, and in Romania, I would say it's pretty much the same thing. Like if you were to bring something like that up, it's like I remember when I was a teenager and I went to my family doctor for that, who was like an old Romanian woman, right? Most of her time spent in Romania. She said something like, exactly. I said, like, what do you mean? Like, you're young, you're healthy, right? Like, what do you have to complain about, right?
Mm,
I went to another psychiatrist. He offered like drugs, Valium or something.
mm,
Yeah, I think, but then like at the same time, I think that like of course, like from someone experiencing that kind of thing, like either people not comprehending or kind of rubbing salt in the wound, right? It's a very painful experience to go through. But then I try to think like there must be a reason that people have these reactions, right? Like it must be serving some kind of purpose. I suppose you could say that, um, you know, in countries that aren't like really rich and wealthy, like I'm assuming Nigeria isn't like that rich and wealthy. Um, probably the reason we both came into this country, or our parents did, um, is that like in those countries, like weakness really is like a danger for
mm,
like the survival of a family. I would suppose, right? It's like you simply cannot, take time off. I'm guessing it's something like that. And then ironically, like in a Western culture here, where like um, I think the wealthier a country is, the more that people are like become softer and more coddled, and so people can take like mental health days. Like I don't know if you've seen that video going around of this woman in her early 20s working for LinkedIn,
mm.
where like she doesn't really do any work at all, right? Like she just goes from one meeting to another, like eating prepared food and stuff like that. Like there's no struggle, there's no nothing. There's people like take lots of breaks and go into quiet rooms for meditation, which I think would
Mhm.
be like unthinkable for like working class Nigerian. Like I think they have like what, like oil refineries or something,
Yeah,
like
there's a lot. Mhm.
like difficult, very difficult and demanding work that is and to a point where people are expendable, probably more so, right? Where it's like, if you're not going to do the job, we're going to get someone else to do it, right? There's no, not enough, not as much mercy. I suppose that could be one element. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
I mean, I do like to believe that human beings work on a basis of good intention, generally. People wouldn't say, "Oh, just pray and get over it," or "Just snap out of it to be mean." I don't believe that's how human beings work. I think when human beings do something, their intentions are good typically. Um, but what I kind of thought about and the way I understood it was that if it's not done from good intention, it's probably done from a place of misunderstanding. And so what I understand is that, and I've talked to friends about this because when I've talked to them about my depression, and I've said that everybody knows what physical pain feels like for the most part, unless there's some sort of nervous system issue. But everybody is able to be like, okay, if I get hit in the face, I know what that feels like. If I get a paper cut, I know what that feels like. And I know that I wouldn't need medical attention for a paper cut, but I would if I was in a very serious accident. But not everybody understands mental health that same way. Not everybody understands what it feels like to feel worthless and like you can't get out of bed, or that um one like a common feeling that I would tell myself every day when I woke up for the past 8 years was I don't really exist, which may not make sense to somebody who's never dealt with depression, and maybe some people with depression, because I think depression operates differently for different people. But some people with depression will probably hear that and be like, "I've felt the same thing." And I think that not everybody understands that the mental part of that, and so not everybody understands how they can treat that. Because everybody knows with the paper cut, you just need to put on a Band-Aid and kiss it better. But it does, that's not how it is for mental health. And also because our bodies naturally have a response that are that is uncontrolled. So if there's a cut on me, I don't have to do anything, and my body will go through the process of healing that cut. It is not the same for depression. Your body doesn't naturally just release more serotonin. Your body does not naturally have therapy for itself. These are things that you have to do outwardly. And so people who have never experienced that couldn't possibly understand what it feels like to go through that.
Okay, so you mentioned serotonin. I don't know if you saw that report from a few days ago where there was saying that there's pretty much no evidence that serotonin, like a low serotonin, leads to depression.
Oh,
And
interesting.
like, which undermines, the entire basis of these drug companies making billions of dollars, because like the whole point is to change the chemical balance
Hmm.
and help the person heal. But if there's no relation between like the chemicals um, that you have in the way that you feel, I mean, it it's kind of criminal for them to drug people, right? And kind of keep their thoughts in line that way. And I mean, I want to get your thoughts on that, but like, I guess people like, Johan Hari would, um, like, I've been talking about this before, where it's like there's there's a reason you feel depressed, like that has a lot to do with the circumstances you're in. And there one of the first researchers on suicide, Durkheim, he said that, when France, I guess Paris or whatever, tr- uh, when people started to move from agrarian communities into the city, suicide rates spiked like 400%, something crazy like that. I don't remember the
Hmm.
numbers, but it's like there's different types of suicide or reasons people commit suicide, but a lot of it has to do with the way that like traditional structures of meaning and social integration have disappeared and collapsed, right? So, I wonder if you've thought of like what it means to move from, you know, Africa to North America. I mean, even for myself, like you would think that, Romania, which is like a European country, moving to North America, which is like, kind of like a European colony, like you would think that there's a match, but I would still say that the fact that my family had to leave Romania with all its horrible problems or whatever, um, that still means like all of like the ancestral, um, I don't know, all of the ancestral ties and like all of my family's history have just been severed, have been cut off completely, and has been relocated to a whole nother realm. And like I think for my parents to move from that country, like it means they were extremely strong-willed people to begin with. But I spent most of my life growing up here, and I don't know. I sometimes I thought like, maybe like like my mental health glitching out has something to do with that. Like it's such an unusual thing to do.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wonder if you've thought about that.
Well, firstly, just the serotonin thing, because I didn't see that report, and I find that interesting. I wonder if that just kind of means that the corporation is running on a gigantic placebo effect, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
which is interesting to think about. But I have tried meds. I had been offered meds and decided not. I didn't want to do meds. So different um like different relationship with it, because like having experienced it, I have a whole thought process about why I felt like meds weren't for me. And it had nothing to do with me thinking that they weren't actually helping me with my serotonin or any sort of chemical production, but it's interesting. But to go into what you did actually ask me, I think that depression, suicide has a lot to do with loneliness. I think that yeah, so I can definitely think why changing where you are, your location, your geographical area, and not being in a place where you feel familiar or where you feel understood, it plays a huge role in how we operate as humans. You can't operate out of a place where you are not comfortable. And I genuinely believe that when people are depressed, they feel either physically lonely, they don't feel like they have people around them. I think it's I was reading a study recently and was talking about women who were, or I think it was people in general who were put in captivity with their families. As soon as their families died, they would stop eating, they would stop doing, obviously, and doing all the things that would normally allow them to survive, because you lose your will to live if you don't feel like you have people around you who you care about or things around you that you care about. So I think loneliness or feeling lonely can actually drastically minimize your will to live. But that is just a personal opinion about what could be a factor. But I could definitely see how that would. coincide with leaving Nigeria and coming to Canada, and it's a completely different environment. The way that the society is set up is completely different. To be in a place of unfamiliarity just sounds traumatizing, especially if you're the first one in your family to do it.
Right, right. I mean, I also have I have a friend from Mexico who has like pretty dark skin, and so he the last time I talked to him, he had to get some like emergency injections of vitamin D into his skin because he wasn't like out in the sun enough, right? Like that's a huge latitude change, and I'm guessing like Nigeria is pretty low in the latitude. So I wonder, like because like if you don't get enough like because your skin is obviously darker and like you're like you're not going to get enough vitamin D, which then like changes like the way you process calcium, and like calcium is tied to magnesium, and it like it's a weird shift. But then I guess like I'm European, so I don't know if that would really like make a difference, right? But
Could make a difference for like people of darker skin, but I think that, like I said, I think that depression manifests itself for very different reasons of different people, and the way that people behave because of depression is very different. I think that there's some people who are high functional people who are dealing with depression, and then there's people who are low functioning people with depression, people who can't get out of bed, who feel debilitated because of it, and then there's the people who are like Chester Bennington, who was the lead singer of Linkin Park, who committed suicide, and you would say he's high functioning because of what he was able to do with his career, but he's depressed nonetheless. Or DeMar DeRozan, as we talked about earlier, or I'm really gonna forget the guy's name from the UFC, but him as well, or his friend as well. You could be very high functioning depression. I think it really depends. And so for different people, for what may cause my depression or how I behave because of it will be different than what may cause, for example, yours or somebody else's.
and so what was you said you're thinking about like whether or not meds were good for you was besides the whole controversy regarding like the role of serotonin in mood regulation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could.
Elaborate? Yeah. So, this is funny because I've told so many people this, but what I felt like when I was taking medication, after not wanting to take medication for years, um, I was in a very low place, and I thought that medication would make some of the things around me operate better. It failed. And then I stopped taking them. But I stopped taking them for a very simple reason. It was at that point I hadn't cried in 4 years, and then I went through a really low point, and I started being able to cry. It broke me. It was like the waterworks opened the floodgates, and everything was coming out. And then I started taking meds, and I could no longer cry again. And I missed being able to cry. Being able to cry it's human. We're natural. We're one of the few animals that do that naturally, that we cry because of emotion. And so I wanted to be able to experience that. And when I took meds, I explained it as being in a room with a rabid dog that is in a cage. So my depression and my suicidal thoughts couldn't access me, but I could hear them gnawing at the bars and trying to get to me. So it's like I knew what I should be feeling at that point, but felt like I was just detached from my thoughts. The suicidal thoughts were present, but they weren't influencing me, and I didn't like that. I would rather experience them than ignore them.
That's super interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with Henry Rollins.
No, but I've been Googling a lot of the things that you've been saying,
It's
so I'm
okay.
gonna.
I just because then it would be uh, it would link what I'm about to say to some other stuff. But like he was the lead singer for a punk rock group called Black Flag. Um,
Okay.
I think that's the name. Anyway, he was one of the first people, one of the first children who was given Ritalin, I think, because he was
Mm.
diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, and like he was a really hyperactive kid in class, and they gave him this drug, and it made him behave better. But he said that like internally, it was still the same hyperactivity, but just like caged, and it was like
Yeah.
really painful because it was like struggling to get out. And so from the outside, he'd just be like, right, just like just seeming that he's in control, but inside
You're
it's just like this really messy way of patching over the issue. And for him, like what really helped was like weightlifting. So he got off the medication and he did a lot of weightlifting and expressing himself through his music and stuff like that. And as far as I know, he never took the drug again. But that if I feel like there's a similarity between the way you
not
describe it. There's a very vivid image of like
of the dog in the
animals like
cage.
being caged.
Yes, and he pretty much said exactly what I did about it being caged up inside him. And I think that that's, I don't want to, because medication works for some people. Some people start taking medication and it works wonders for them. So I don't want to say that it's not good to take medication. If something works for you and it makes you feel happy, then I believe that you should do it. But personally, I didn't like the idea of band-aid solutions. I wanted to actually fix what I felt was the problem. And so I like for him, he said that weightlifting was able to help him get out all those symptoms, for lack of a better word, of what he was dealing with. For me, it was fake positivity. It was the fake it till you make it method. Really just I decided to be a positive person. I decided to think about life differently. I decided to approach life differently, and it's really helped. And that's not realistic for everybody, but that was my approach. But everybody has their own approach. But really putting the dog in a cage and the cage is still right beside you, I don't think that that does anything for anybody.
I don't know if you ever heard of the signal theory of symptoms. You familiar with that?
No.
So like, there's this really interesting. This I find this theory really interesting when it comes to depression. And like, because you mentioned placebo, right? Where it's like they were trying to theorize like um, what would be a way for you to signal to other people that you need help, right? And like, for example, um, the more extreme a symptom is, the more it's likely to elicit help from somebody, right? Like if you see someone like struggling and like they're coughing a lot, they're sneezing, they have like fever, they have like bloodshot eyes or whatever, right? You're more likely to be like, oh, there's something wrong with that person, right? Um, and so when it comes to, you know, something um, like the treatment for that, right? Like imagine your symptoms are showing, and then somebody comes to you, or you go to somebody in your tribe or your village or whatever, and they pay attention to you, they ask you lots of questions, they you know they tend to you, they give you soup, they give whatever, right? They do something for you. Maybe they give you some herb or whatever. Then like those symptoms will abate because your body's like, okay, well, we've sought help from somebody, from one of our conspecifics in our group, right? We've sought help, so we can kind of tamper down the symptoms, and like we can go into like healing. We now know that we're safe, that we can heal. And so they were using that as a model to explain how placebo effect works, where it's like placebo doesn't like cure cancer, right? Like it can make symptoms a lot better, right? So they're thinking like, okay, let's say you go to a doctor, someone you trust, someone we put a lot of faith in, right? And so if the doctor's like, okay, take this pill, it might be fake, right? It may just be some sugar. Doctor says, take this pill, and you take it thinking that like you've been given care, love, and affection from your group, your society. And so now your body's like, okay, we're being tended to, we can start to heal. And in connection to like depression meds, they were saying that as antidepressants became more marketed, the effect, the placebo effect also increased, which makes sense because like if people keep hearing along the media, like, okay, you go to your doctor, you get antidepressant medication, that means that you're being taken care of, you're being treated, then your symptoms will also go away, right? And people think that it's the medication, but it's actually like this weird social phenomenon. So it's like, it's weird that the drug works, but not for the reasons that we might think. Like it's not necessarily that it's like rejigging serotonin, but just something to think about.
I actually I actually just wanted to pose a question to you because you just kind of unlocked something. So I was thinking about how I discussed being not people not being able to really understand depression and mental health issues unless they've had some sort of experience with it. And then you look at a lot of career paths and they run tests to determine somebody's mental well-being beforehand. So you get careers that are frequently dealing with and spending time with people who have these mental health issues or have something going on, and they're being treated, or they are the people who are handling them or dealing with them are people who they have made sure have not experienced these things before. So I find that very interesting. If, as a police officer, if you fail the aptitude test for, or you fail any test that deal with how you are able to handle yourself mentally, you can't be a police officer. So you have to have a pretty solid state of mind based off of their understanding in order to handle people, and a lot of people, typically a police officer, who have mental health issues, which I find very interesting. How are you putting people in a position to deal with something they have no experience or knowledge of, at least from a personal level? Obviously, you wouldn't know in like from experiencing with other people, but personally, they don't really relate to that, or at least you try to test that they don't relate to it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Like, it makes me think of, you know, like when acid started to become popular in the 1960s. Um, One of the people who like really popularized it was Timothy Leary, and he was, if not the head of the psychology department at Harvard, like at least he was really high up there. And I remember a story where, like, I think he was arrested, and then they were like going to like run all sorts of psychological tests to make sure that he was like sane, right? To kind of get an idea of like how much he would be considered a threat, like what kind of treatment to give him to bring him back to sanity. And the tests that they used were ones that he designed, right? So like testing him based to see if he's crazy or not based on the test that he like. It's
Yeah.
like I feel like there's a certain threshold that you break where it's like at a certain point, like it's really just like the not the luck of the draw who gets to determine the rules, but it's an extremely difficult problem to solve, right? Like how do you trust the people making assessments if they don't have the requisite ability to kind of like you say like shift between different modes of like if they have never felt insane, how can they treat an insane person, right?
And I think that there's a scary thought. It's a scary thought that we as a society want people who in every other aspect you have to have experience. Your resume is full of experience, but if you have the experience of that, you're looked at differently. And I expressed to you, and I said that I didn't cry for 4 years, and the reason I didn't cry was I cried in public, and in my university career, there was a night where it was really bad, and I went outside and I was crying, and it was raining. It was really dramatic. It was like a movie, and people walked by and they saw me, and then I had campus security come and get me and take me aside, and they made me go speak to a counselor. They said it was optional, and I refused, and then they said, "Okay, well, I guess it's not really optional, like, go see the counselor." So I went to the counselor, and the counselor said, well, after, like, a much conversation, at the end of it, her solution was not to cry in public because it scared the student body. I said, "Okay." And I didn't cry for 4 years after that, but I think it's interesting to put people who have no idea of what somebody else may be going through. I mean, I don't know her personal story, but it didn't seem like she had much empathy for what I was dealing with. You put her in that position to talk to people, and I think people are scared. People are scared of things that are unknown. It's natural to fear the unknown. That's what we do as human beings. We run from it. And that was her initial reaction to me, and for me, it manifested itself in a terrible way. It blockaded my ability to cry in any capacity, not even in public, only for 4 years until I had to went through something else that I considered, emotionally traumatic, and then it released itself. But And then you're putting people in a position to handle people with something that is unknown to them, and that will be scary for them. And I think that the results can be very bad.
That's super interesting. Like, is there anything you can divulge about this person, this woman, this counselor?
I probably wouldn't want to, but I could just say that I also think it's very interesting, and this is something that I thought about, is the fact that as a black male, a young black male, I typically would rather speak to other young black people about my issues as I feel as they'll understand it. And I was forced to go see somebody who I didn't want to speak to, and she happened to be an older white woman. And I just feel like if you want to have success, you have to have people who can empathize with the person that they're talking to. And empathy isn't only based on looks, but I think it's easier to empathize with somebody that you do have similar physical features with. I think that's pretty normal.
Right. I mean, I guess it is like from like I don't know, just like my general cultural impression is that like you look like somebody who's like tough, right? Like you're like an athletic young guy,
Thanks.
right? And so like if you're crying, it's like what is this? Get out of here, right? Like like
Yeah, they assume you're fine. And I think that touches to what we talked about as men. Men typically, or the way we see toughness is we think men look tougher than women. So it's like, hey, just handle it, toughen up.
right,
The
yeah.
saying is man up. That saying itself is it carries a lot of, I don't like the word toxicity, but a lot of toxicity for society is if you go around telling people to man up, is it a masculine trait to not feel emotions or to not deal with them or to ignore them? And it shouldn't be, but I think sometimes it is, or people make it seem like it is.
Um, I mean, like if I was to try to play devil's advocate, I would say um, like for example, when I think about the way in which um, like your experience can be seen like throughout human history is like this idea that you're kind of like stepping out of line in some way, right? Like the inappropriate display of emotion, right, given your role in society. um like and I've written about this and talked about it maybe a bit too much, but like just because obviously you're not like um that familiar with my stuff, but like um as far as I can tell, if you look at the way in which like the bodies of human beings have developed over hundreds of thousands of years, it's like if you kind of like step out of line, like from your society, like at a certain point, like you just get killed, right? Like if you usually if it's like you're too aggressive or too brutal, and although I'm sure that that extends to a different area, so it's like the the way that human beings have developed is like a constant domestication. Like even the way that our skulls are shaped compared to like a million years ago, they're much smaller. And if you look at the way that animals change when they're domesticated, they become they share similar traits. So when you look at bonobos versus chimpanzees, bonobos are friendlier, more sociable. They have smaller skulls, stuff like that. So it just makes me think of the way in which there's like a certain level of violence and like murder involved in like shaping people to kind of behave properly.
Mm.
And when it comes to the way men are treated in that regard, like to reiterate, it's like men are often sent off to die in wars, right? They're like constantly culled and deleted from the population, sort of. And you know I think most violent criminals are men, and they're kind of like pushed into these little cages and stuff like that. And I mean, I've even seen evidence that, like, in I think medieval Europe, medieval England, um, they would execute people for like really small infractions of the law, which would, in effect, change everyone to be more domesticated, to be better rule followers, right? And it's like when I think about the way in which there is that toxic element, or like you either man up we're gonna punish you in some way, right? We're gonna ostracize you or put you in an institution or put you in prison and stuff like that. And I mean, it's not something that I think people really like to talk about because it's like a really ugly element of society, right? Where it's like it's I feel like there's a lot of like lip service given to this idea of like let's say diversity and inclusion, but
Mm,
like I feel like it's kind of an incoherent idea when you think about it because like obviously there's a lot of stuff that we want to exclude, right?
mm,
Everybody does, like no matter what your politics are, like that is what politics is. It's like who do you consider a friend and an enemy, right? It's like I'm sure you could have said some really uh, inflammatory things to this counselor, right? That would have would have made your life hell, right? Or like vice versa. Like I'm sure you could have like really taken revenge on her in some way, right? Um, and I think that's a really difficult problem. Um, I want to say especially with men because like I said, I think if it came down to it, right, like um, who gets to live and die, like if you look at the war in the Ukraine, it's like all the women and children got to leave, the men had to stay behind and die, right? For and I'm not sure everyone was on board, right? I'm not sure
exactly.
everyone was willing to fight just because the Zelensky wanted to or something. And so yeah, to continue, like what I was getting at is, um, if I was to really play devil's advocate, the way the society treats men is like the more that it pressures them to man up, the more that everyone who's quote unquote weak will be like selected out. And of course, that's a horrible thing to say, right? But
Mm,
that is kind of how it functions. And I feel like your example here is kind of showing that, where it's like the impression I get is, when someone's in a university, it's all about like, being open minded, being willing to discuss, not cowering in the face of discomfort, or exploring new ideas, hearing new voices, right? This kind of thing. But I feel like really, like you have to step in line very carefully with expected behavior.
I think, firstly, I want to say that you're an extremely you're the way you're a conduit for knowledge. Like there's things that you just know and that you just say. And I know it's not the first time I met you, and you just like carry yourself very well in the way that you speak. So I really appreciate the way that you deliver what you and like your ideas. But to go off of that and into more what we're actually talking about is yeah, and I feel like even what I said about myself kind of faking it until I make it is because of that. Is that I either was going to be weeded out, in terms of, unfortunately, it's a very loud car, weeded out, unfortunately, via suicide, or I would find a way to make myself fit into this jigsaw puzzle of society. And my way to do that was I just gotta fucking be happy. It was not, it was just, there was no, it
I
was just
love
like,
it.
I have to be happy. I can't do anything else. And so it's either I pick one or the other, and I made a decision to just try to survive and try to fit in. And I don't actually know if that is sustainable. Can you pretend to be happy and long enough and actually generate real happiness? Can can the people who in the war who maybe didn't want to stay back and fight, can they say, you know what, no, I wanted to fight and wake up every day and actually one day be happy that they have to be part of that? I don't know if that's realistic. Um, and I think that we do force people to conform. Um, I think one of my favorite musicians is Brent Faiyaz. He's an R&B singer, and one of my favorite songs by him is called "L.A." And there's one line in it where he says, "Nobody's cutting checks if you ain't happy smiling." So if you are
Ooh.
not doing what you're doing, and if you're not being happy, nobody cares. Life doesn't stop. Things continue. It's this rat race that we are in is continuous, and it doesn't stop for anybody. Even the people that you care about most, their lives continue regardless of what happens. um and so I think that society, as much as we want to have the diversity and inclusion, like, no, you can be sad, you can be depressed, you can be debilitated by it, you'll remain stuck if that is the way that you carry out your life. If there is anything else that you want to do, I don't think you necessarily have to do anything in order for life to have meaning. But if there's things that you want to accomplish, you if you are debilitated by your sadness, you won't accomplish them. And the way society works is nobody's going to give it to you, and I don't think anybody should necessarily have to do that with their own lives. But you're stuck then, and you get weeded out. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the time is people give up on you when they realize that you can't break out of that mindset of sadness. And it's like, I think at first it starts with, oh, okay, he's sad, he's upset, let me take care of him. And oh, he's still sad, he's upset, this must be a problem. And it's like, oh, Nnamdi's still in bed, he's not getting out of bed. Oh, he's a grown man, he needs to figure out a way to deal with this. And it's not that simple for everybody. And eventually you end up forgotten.
I mean, that really matches my experience. Where like, I feel like it reached a point where, um, I feel like I was staring the, like, let's say the dark side of humanity, um, which I think is just as valuable as the bright side. It's like, but where it was like this thing where, it was like, if I don't break out of this, like, or like there's no one going to do it for me. Like that, like either I don't break out of this, or sorry, either I break out of this or I just disappear. Like people are just not going to care. Like that level of, I want to call it this realization that I'm really disposable, right? Like it's a tough one, but I feel like it makes me stronger in some ways. Um, I want to say like in like I've seen these videos though of like um, these young women on TikTok talking kind of gleefully about how like men are useless, how they can't wait for a world without men and stuff like that. And it makes me think that I think for some people, they might actually succeed in getting a lot of sympathy from people and having their lives made a lot easier because they know they have mental health struggles. They will have their lives made a lot easier, but like someone always has to pick up the slack, right? Like someone has to, ship the groceries in, someone has to do the farming, someone has to do the plumbing, right? Usually it's going to be men, right? And stuff like that. And so I think that in a way it sort of makes sense, but it's also tough because I guess the critique of capitalism in this sense is that like we have so much abundance and yet we we don't distribute it equally and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I do sympathize with your strategy, and I feel like there might be some similarity in what we experienced and like the outcome we had, where it's like you have to pick that, even if you don't feel it, you have to pick that path because the other one is just it's not really an option.
It's a black hole.
A black hole, right?
You go in there and you're stuck. That TikTok's very interesting because I'm not going to talk about whether men are useless or not. In my opinion, obviously they're not. I don't think any life is useless or meaningless. But I think that play like those sentiments come from a place of men have been obviously they've done a lot of horrible things in history and people. And as we uncover the horrible things that men have done, people in general have, but because of things that men done, we start to hate men, and that's become something that's very consistently said. But I think that I'm not going to really touch on that because I feel like that's a whole nother podcast in itself. But I want to touch on how that makes people feel. I mean, I think it's very destructive to go on TikTok and be like, men are useless or they don't have meaning, or to say that about anybody is destructive because people like me, and like I said at the beginning, people with depression, I think that they internalize a lot of things. And I think that can break a lot of people. So I think when you have a platform and you use that platform and you put out things that say things like that, that could actually end up hurting people. Like some people say it's not that serious, and they're probably right. They're probably right. They probably like don't mean that in the actual sense of the words that they're meaning. But I do think that people have the ability to take things in a way that could destroy them. And if somebody's already going through things, they're more likely to take it in that way. So I find that very interesting, just about what you choose to put out in terms of content and how it can affect society, the way people think, Or also, if everybody is saying that men are meaningless and men are worthless and men have always been evil, well, as we create new generations and that becomes a part of society, everyone's going to start thinking men are evil. I think a more productive solution is, how can men not be evil? Or how can people in general not be evil, or anything of that nature? Just saying that men suck, which I do see a lot, and I'm not here to disagree or agree with. I don't really want to touch on that. I just feel like it's a useless conversation instead of how can we be better. Not that people are supposed to teach you how to be better. I think that's a whole another conversation that will stem from it, but just how can we be better?
Right. And I guess, like you said, what culpability do we have for the kind of thing that we put out there, and like how we influence other people?
Hmm.
And yeah, like it's sometimes tricky for me um, to even like theorize about this kind of thing, about like seeing these videos without at the same time sounding like I need to, without at the same time sounding like, like women are the problem or something like that, right? Because like anytime I hear something like, men are da 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 da, right? I'm thinking like, well, I know many different men, right? And there's huge differences between us, right? Temperamentally, physically, like psychologically, right? And so I can understand though, like the desire to like categorize and simplify things so as to see patterns, and then like think of the way in which those patterns might play out, the way then those patterns might be influenced. And so yeah, I generally agree, right? Like resentment towards men or women like is like a symptom of some other deeper issue that someone has with themselves. And it's dangerous to let that go unchecked, because of course it can like damage other people. Like, if you're a counselor and you tell somebody crying at university, like they might, you might destroy them emotionally for years, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
I just I just think that somebody that I like recently found myself getting close with, we had a discussion and we talked about how important it is to deal with the emotional aspects of it. So just like touching on what they said, if you feel like men suck and you hate them, I think it's important to touch on that and figure out ways to like deal with that. That's an important thought to deal with. Maybe not publicly, but it is important to deal with. And then also the more important part, or a very important part, maybe as important, is the solution-based part. So if you're gonna go on TikTok and say men suck, and possibly you do something that's damaging to other people mentally, try to be solution based. So how can men suck less? It's just my opinion. If that like, and I think that everyone has a right to speak about what they want to speak about as well. That's freedom of speech, and I think that but I think it would be, there's a way it could be productive.
something I just remembered when you were talking about Brent Fayez earlier.
Mhm.
I don't know. Do you know who Patrice O'Neill is?
I do.
Yeah. Okay. So
Somebody I know. Perfect.
okay. Do you know who Kevin Samuels is?
All right, we're back to people I don't know.
Okay. Okay. He's
Kevin Samuels. Let me wait 1 second.
But okay. So let's stick with
Please.
Patrice, because
Okay.
Patrice O'Neill. So Patrice O'Neill, he was hired to be an actor for, I don't know, some famous director in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling this story about going to set to shoot, and how he had to wake up really early in the morning, and how he didn't feel like being all like, hi everyone, right? Like to,
Yeah.
the people in the the woman in the elevator at 6 a.m. He's like, I don't care. I'm not in a good mood. Why should I be pretending?
Yeah.
Right. And he was like that throughout the experience, and they didn't call him back. Right. Like, and he was kind of complaining about exactly like you said, like if you're not smiling, they're not going to cut the check for you.
For sure.
Right. Like you have to fake it to fit in. And I've heard that too with like the fashion industry, where like you you cannot be successful if you're critical. Like you have to, everything you see, you got to be like, that's so cool, I love it, right? Like you always have to be positive. Like that's just what you have to do. And some people find that much harder than others. Like Patrice, he found it like he was not just selling out, that he was like almost like mutilating his soul. That's the way he talks about it. But but I think Patrice, and it's like weird because um like people like Patrice, if they were the kind of person who would like fit into line and conform, like their comedy would be like boring garbage. But like
Hmm.
the reason he's so good is because he like just um he has like almost no filter sometimes,
Yes.
like and like the kind of stuff he says, which is why I love listening to him.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was reading this thing yesterday about how like it's a common desire to want to like domesticate and break men instead
Mhm.
of like finding outlets for them, but it's really hard sometimes to find that out. Like for example, for like a young man to like channel like suicidal depression, like where did they go, what did they do, right? Like I can't think of any
I just think that naturally, and this is, I think, in like every field you go into, or for the most part, except for artistic fields,
hmm.
you're expected to like check your shit at the door. You leave that at the door, and you pick up your sadness, your depression, your mental health when you leave. And I mean, I know there's places that try to be more forward thinking, like, oh, if you need to like lay down during work, like the new Google industries will have like beds in their offices and stuff like
Yes.
that. But for the most part, if you're working, they say you're a machine essentially for the time that you're here, and then you get to be a human on your own time when we're not paying you. But you don't, and that's why I really love art in its raw form. And I think that's why my poetry comes out the way that it does, is because I will listen to a sad song and I appreciate the fact that sadness can be expressed. And you don't really see sadness expressed anywhere. If I wanted to make a marketing campaign for Sunny D and I was just feeling sad that day and I just made it completely dark and black and it looked completely depressing, they wouldn't accept it. You don't get to do that in regular careers. But in movies, in art, in like so music, in like drawings, and all those things, you get to really put your sadness into it. And I think that's why I appreciate sad media and sad art so much. And I think that that's great for men who happen to be artistic. Unfortunately, not everybody is inclined in that way or feels like they're inclined in that way. I think that everybody could produce art, but a lot of people don't feel like they want to do that. So, how do men who may not always be as pushed to speak about their own sadness and mental issues, how do they find a way to do that? And that's why I think that there's such an importance of art and how we are able to kind of be our dark selves in that scope.